This is our third entry of the Director's Dialogues. This is the Q&A session for the documentary Oasis in Atlanta. And we have a much anticipated launch in early 2026. I'm your host, Nate Paris, and today's dialogue is with Bob Shands. He is an author and now a filmmaker. And I wanted to offer a few more details about Bob. If you've been following along with us on the other Director's Dialogues, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. But we want to continue this discussion as we get approach closer to the release of this film. First things first, I wanted to get into the bio so that you guys can know more about Bob. Bob is a community engager and fierce debater who brings depth to the discussion table, possesses the ability to reduce complex concepts to the explainable terms in a non-combative, compassionate manner. He has a Bachelor of Science in Business Administration from the University of Missouri at Kansas City and has served on numerous foundation and advisory boards. He is the author of In My Father's House, Lessons Learned in the Home of a Civil Rights Pioneer, and has recently embarked on his documentary, Oasis in Atlanta, which is a Christian historical documentary with an anticipated launch in early 2026. I have the documentary trailer here. I'm going to go ahead and play it for you. So I hope you enjoy, and then we're going to come back and continue our third Director's Dialogue.
My father was a giant in my eyes. I grew up on the second row of the pews of the church, looking up at him. At home, he was very loving, he was demanding. I think the things I learned from my father were to tell the truth. I was raised with a strong sense of right and wrong, an idea about how to treat people. In Georgia, the racial tension was somewhat understated until the Supreme Court decision of 1954. And the reason I say it was understated is that blacks knew their place. And I say that in a bad way. It was horrible. The Supreme Court decision of 1954 led to things like a desire to shut down the whole public school system in the state of Georgia, to avoid any kind of integration and mingling of the races. That was an ongoing effort for years, and my dad took a strong leadership position in the efforts to not only peacefully desegregate the schools, but keep the schools open. Dad had mentioned the Minister's Manifesto of Atlanta one time to me that I could remember. We were in a car driving in Alpharetta, Georgia, and he just casually mentioned that he had that day or that week been to a reunion, but I believe it was the 35th reunion of the 1957 Minister's Manifesto. I knew that I was looking for something about the Minister's Manifesto. I didn't know anything about it. So I really started out with just a time frame. I knew I was looking for the Minister's Manifesto. When we moved to Atlanta in 1953, Dad had already been involved in trying to work on race relations. He was a member of a standing committee between white and black pastors in Atlanta to create a dialogue. One of the members of that committee from the black side was Martin Luther King Sr. He had become convicted by the Holy Spirit in the area of race relations many years earlier. Within the Baptist church and the white church, white Christian church in general, there was a great deal of disagreement and tension in the area of civil rights and race relations. Dad was always on the side of treating every human being as being created in the image of God. Was always on the side of better, more Christ-like relations between the races within the church and the church's role in that. Since 1997, I've been attempting to tell this story. Today is the culmination of that effort. It's finally reaching a point where it can be told effectively. And I believe that that God has brought this to pass. I believe that this is a moment that was destined. The Minister's Manifesto of 1957 was also a statement on the part of white Christian ministers in support of the Brown versus Board of Education decision of 1954, and a statement about a Christian's responsibility in the area of civil rights and race relations. As a result of the research that I did and the miraculous events that led to my being able to bring the story full circle, I wrote a book, In My Father's House, Lessons Learned in the Home of a Civil Rights Pioneer. It was published in 2006. It was the historical story. This is the spiritual story. Dad's story is secondary. This is the spiritual side of it. This is about God. This is about God making an impact. What can happen? This is the evangelical story. This is what can happen when you give your life to Jesus Christ. A teenage white boy from Columbus, Georgia, from a racist family. And he began making efforts to change Spartanburg, South Carolina, Atlanta, Georgia. And he succeeded in lighting a match, in my opinion, in the ministerial community in Atlanta. So it's a story about my dad, yes, but it's a story about Jesus Christ that I think the world needs to hear.
All right, we're back. If you want to share this trailer, you can visit us at bobshands.com. That is BOBSHANDS.com. I'll put a link in the description below. Um, we encourage you to share this with your family and friends, those of you who are interested in history, those of you that are interested in Christian topics. We want you to share this far and wide because we really believe that this narrative is one that should get out there to the masses. For a lot of you, this is a never before heard of concept. And so we want to get this shared far and wide. If you feel it's in your heart to give to this effort, we have a fundraising link available in the description below. We encourage you to help us with the production of this film. So you can visit us at givesendgo.com and search for Oasis in Atlanta, or you can visit the fundraising link. We thank you and appreciate those of you who have given to this effort. So this is the third director's dialogue, and I encourage you to go back and listen to our first and second director's dialogue. But today I want to go into a more challenging topic. You know, we talked a lot about the creativity that goes behind making a film like this. We've also talked about the background behind why this film needs to happen. But I really want to get into some of the existing narrative and why we feel like it is not sufficient, especially when we're talking about race relations, you know, a very sensitive topic that deserves a lot of care. This film sheds light on the cooperation that existed in Atlanta between both Black and white ministers. But there were some aspects to the film that we feel like are difficult that we want to press on. We want to kind of, you know, mash and let people know that this is really, really important. But unfortunately, you know, of course, mainstream media has its own way of sharing this information. And you know, and Bob, and you and I have talked a lot about this, of course, off camera and other discussions as we come to the creation of this film. And I sense that you feel like this, and I feel this way too, but I sense that you feel like what's being said about the Minister's Manifesto, what's being said about the civil rights movement in Atlanta is wholly insufficient. And I want to open the floor and let you explain why you feel that way.
One of the things I'm passionate about, Nay, is race relations and peacemaking. And the basic building block of that is the truth. This is not an ego project. for me, nor is it a legacy project about Dad, although he created quite a legacy with his actions. It's about trying to engender better relations between the races. And Atlanta has the moniker of being a city too busy to hate, or the city too busy to hate. Um, Generally speaking, that is attributed to the business community and the relationship between the business community and some of the Black intelligentsia in Atlanta. There actually was an interview done by Yahoo Finance with Andrew Young, who was obviously a minister as well, about the topic Atlanta, the city too busy to hate. And he made reference to this relationship between the business community and the Black intelligentsia, but he didn't mention the minister's manifesto. The minister's manifesto was an outgrowth of cooperation and dialogue between white and Black ministers that made a letter like Martin Luther King Jr.'s letter from a Birmingham jail unnecessary in Atlanta. Now, it is true that the business community really did not want a duplicate experience that Little Rock had or that Birmingham had, primarily Little Rock, because at this time Birmingham had not really blown up. So there was an aspect of accuracy and truth to what Reverend Young said, but I feel like it was a little bit incomplete.
Okay. Why do you think that? And for those of you who aren't aware, Andrew Young is the former mayor of Atlanta. And I just wanted to ask, why do you, or just in your opinion, why do you think that they touched on, say, like the Black intelligentsia's involvement in this and not the role of the pastors, both Black and white in the area, ministers, both Black and white in the area who were involved in this? Why do you think they would look over that?
Well, as you said, this is a little bit of a difficult topic. There is a narrative in our country that a lot of people have used to make a fine living in continuing the combative relationship. And I think that the cooperation between the white and Black ministers doesn't meet the narrative, the public narrative that is prevalent today. For example, there was a standing committee between the National Baptist Association, which was the Black Baptist Association at the time, and the Georgia Baptist Convention, that was regular meetings between white and Black ministers. Martin Luther King Sr. was a part of that. Dad became a part of that when we moved to Atlanta in 1953. Dr. Williams Holmes Borders was part of that. So there was this attempt to dialogue that preceded the minister's manifesto by a few years. And I have interviews with Dad where he makes reference to some of those meetings. Now, when the minister's manifesto came out in November of 1957, it was a surprise publicly. It was front page news on the Atlanta Constitution. And for a couple of days after, there were reactions from the Black ministers, all very positive. But it came across as being something brand new, and that was not the case. As I said, this dialogue had been ongoing. There were champions of social justice in the ministerial community, in addition to Dad, I think of Dr. Dow Kirkpatrick. I think of Dr. Bevel Jones. I think of Pastor J.T. Ford. Now, in my opinion, none was as out front as Dad was. I think that the Minister's Manifesto came out in 1957. I think that Dad's activities at the Georgia Baptist Convention exactly 1 year earlier in November 1956 lit that match and was front page news for 3 days. It did to the public appear to be out of left field, so to speak, and be a surprise. But the backstory is that the dialogue existed. And again, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. never felt the need to chastise the white Atlanta ministers as he did in the letter from a Birmingham jail, which, if you haven't read it, it is amazing, just beautifully written. It's lengthy.
It is. It
but
is.
I would highly recommend people to take the opportunity to look that up and read it.
It was part of our required reading when I was in school. So,
That's
yes,
good. That's good to know.
it was quite lengthy. I do recall, but I'm not sure. I hope that there are schools that are, pointing students in that direction today, and families as well. It's certainly worth the read. And, we can always put an archive link in here so that those of you who have not read it, you can read it for yourself, because I just believe the truth should just be put out there, So, I'm just grateful for technology today where we can just, access pretty much anything that we want. And, the truth is right there in front of us. But then there's also a lot of misinformation, of course, as we're, unfortunately aware of. And it's not just technology, but also what we decide to give our attention to. And I think what I'm saddened about, Bob, is that even though the response to the Minister Manifesto was a wholly positive, that it still didn't get the attention that it deserved. It just wasn't done justice.
Well, a part of that, when you say wasn't done justice, is looking at that in a 21st century lens. Again, it was unpopular in terms of fitting the narrative. Now, the reaction to it is that the Minister's Manifesto was an extremely weak expression. But if you look at it in a 1950s lens, it was an extremely risky expression.
Yes.
It very nearly cost my dad his job.
Right.
It did cost some other pastors their jobs. I do believe that there are aspects of the social situation in the 1940s and 50s that are accurately presented as horrific. But I don't think they fully give a picture of the day-to-day life of the Black population. Mm-hmm. And it was bleak, it was demeaning. Mm-hmm. And I say that from just the eyes of a 4 to 14-year-old boy who witnessed it. Okay. We always think about the segregated buses having to sit in the back. Mm-hmm. We are familiar with the different water fountains for Black and white.
Yes.
We are familiar with the lynchings. Mm-hmm. But the day-to-day life that I witnessed of Blacks in the South in that time frame was truly demeaning. And I think hopefully that's one thing that came across in my book in a little more detail about the environment. As part of the misunderstanding of the narrative of Atlanta being the city too busy to hate, as I said, Dr. Martin Luther King Sr. was a close compatriot of Dad's. As I said, on regular standing committees or discussion groups. Yet in his autobiography, he twice made reference to the fact that no white minister ever took a stance in terms of trying to lead their congregation in the area of civil rights and social justice. When I was writing the book, thankfully, Dad was still alive and very lucid and cognizant and expressive. So when I was researching and I ran across that, I told him about that. And I never heard my dad say anything bad about anybody. Frustrated my mother to death. But he simply just looked at me and said, well, he knows that wasn't true.
Right.
And that was his only response.
Right. It makes you wonder, and of course, I have to tailor it to that era, and I don't say it in a way that is judgmental, but it makes you wonder what were some of the pressures experienced by individuals in that time era that would lead them to feel like they needed to say that, even though, like your father was saying that no, this isn't true. This is, we had a completely different knowing of one another, so it makes you wonder what makes that occur.
For Dr. King Sr., it may have been an experience he had as a boy. There was a black man walking home from his job and counting his money, counting his bills, and Dr. King watched him be lynched because he had to have been taking a job from a white man. Experiences like that are hard to overcome, even with commitment to the ministry. That's one reason I do believe that Dr. King Jr.'s emphasis on love and not being hateful came from his commitment to he was quoted in Red Book magazine as saying he was first and foremost a minister of the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Yes.
And I believe the current narrative underplays that the major role that played in Dr. King Jr.'s life. He is criticized for other things, but my personal opinion is that his writings in the area of civil rights show that emphasis and that commitment.
Bob, are there other people out there having this sort of discussion or speaking about this topic in this way? You're the first to come to me and share your story, and that's how we ended up, working together. But are there other voices out there that are bringing light to this truth here?
There are none that I know that are specifically addressing the cooperation in Atlanta and the history of Atlanta relative to the role the Minister's Manifesto played in it. There are many voices in our current environment who are emphasizing the love of Christ, the role that plays in race relations.
Yes.
My dad made me memorize the Beatitudes when I was very young, and blessed are the peacemakers sticks with me. They all stick with me. But in this context, the blessed are the peacemakers. As controversial as this may be, Charlie Kirk was probably one of the strongest voices, and his legacy carries on today. It's just 7 weeks since he was assassinated, but it seems like a lifetime ago.
It was it's so very tragic, but we've just got to get to a place where we can have civil discourse, whether we agree with it or not, without it, coming to the loss of life. We have to get there. And that underscores the very importance of this documentary, this film here, because we need to get to where race relations can be looked at from a accurate, if not just the truthful lens that it is. Of course, you're going to have all different perspectives coming together on this, but it's important that no perspectives are, glossed over or overlooked. I feel like a majority of Americans, especially today, looking back on the past, we want transparency, but just with this documentary alone, there's just so much that surfaces as we go over the material, go through the archives. It's like, wow, some things don't hit you until it hits you, and then you're reading it and you're like, wait a minute, this is really important to know. So but I just want to encourage, say, our listeners, our viewers, to never just kind of gloss over it, be curious, want to go deeper with it, and that some of the truth is going to be uncomfortable. When I listen to, Bob and I talk a lot, but when I listen to the conversations, from that time, I'll put a link to the Andrew Young interview, because I want to talk more about that maybe in a future episode. But when you think about narratives that, get like looked over, it makes you, at least for me, I get upset, because it's like, no, I feel like there are people who, if they were here today, could say a completely different story. And so that's why I feel like taking the time opportunity to look back, taking the opportunity to go through archives, to listen, will help us, tell us a lot more about today and the future, where we're headed.
I made reference earlier to there being an industry that
Mhm.
has surfaced around keeping us at each other's throats, and
Yes.
um, I think I'll just leave it at that. But the risk in any of these discussions is that there has been improvement, and if we reference that improvement in race relations, we run the risk of it being interpreted as underplaying how bad it was, and underplaying how it's still not perfect.
Right.
So it's like a two-sided coin. Nay, in the time period in which I was raised in the environment, our having this conversation would be, we hear in today's environment about the percentage of people who believe that political violence is justified.
Mhm.
If we were having this conversation in the 1950s, which we wouldn't have been having this conversation, I would be putting my life at risk. Just to put that in context.
Right. Absolutely. And it's righteous to say that, yes, race relations has improved. We have to be able to say it's confidently that there are some areas that have improved, and we can't deny that. The fact that you and I are having this conversation, this is something that would not have happened 50, 60, 70 years ago. There were people who would not listen to a conversation like this for the fact that we are both in the conversation together. It's just really important that we stay honest, about how far we have come, and that speaking on that is not an undoing of anything. It's not a, it's not to say, it's not a blanketing over it, or it's not washing it away. It is just showing that progress is possible, because we have to all believe that it is possible, and we can't just look away. If we just constantly just look at it from, like, but what about back then? What about back then? It's not that those topics don't matter, but both of those things can be true at the same time.
Yes, they
And
can.
so that is something that we have to get to as a society. And so that's why I encourage my listeners, the viewers, anybody who has, a little bit of historical interest in historical narrative and civil rights narrative and race relations, to continue the conversations and to be able to identify progress where it actually exists, and to see it from what it is, not just from the lens that we are in the present day. Also look at things from the lens of how people saw it back then too. You're able, and you're totally entirely capable of doing both at the same time. That's just why I'm grateful to be a part of this documentary, this team, to be able to hear it, and be among few that are, involved in hearing it and going through the narrative and going through the archives, and dissecting what's what, and being in a position to present it to each of you. So, I'm just grateful for that opportunity to do so.
I'd just like to add to that, for any of our viewers, you and I have been working together for 3 or 4 years. This is not something that you've just recently signed on to,
Mhm.
for the purpose of making this documentary. We have had a working relationship
Mhm.
prior to this.
So that said, Bob, is there anything else you want to expand on? Because what I really would like to touch on, most importantly, is the moral courage to do something like this, to, be, among few, very, very few, if anybody, who is like, what, this needs to come to the forefront. So is there anything else you want to add that people should know about this?
I would just like to give a shout out to John Still, who was the chairman of deacons of Dad's church, West End Baptist Church,
Okay.
at the time of the Georgia Baptist Convention of 1956. Because he took stand to support Dad, even though it was the antithesis of how he was raised and even what he believed, um, even while teaching a Sunday school class to preteen boys.
Mm.
Um, the events of the Georgia Baptist Convention of 1956, um, as I said, almost cost Dad his job.
Yes.
And John Still was the um, treasurer, I believe, of Fulton County, Georgia. So he had something on the line,
Mhm.
being a government employee and being a white man. Um, and he took a strong stance in support of Dad, and even voiced that it was different for him, and he had taken 3 days off of work to study the scriptures and pray about this deacons meeting that was very stressful.
Mhm.
And so it emphasizes, that you mentioned earlier in your intro, that this is a Christian historical documentary,
Yes.
but I knew John Still, and um, I have seen correspondence between Mr. Still and my father in that time frame, and the life changing influence of Jesus Christ on a person's life to take difficult positions that are righteous and spiritual. Um, I mentioned in one of our previous directors' dialogues that the process of going through all of Dad's correspondence and all of the archives has just made this very relevant to me in terms of my spiritual life. So I would just like to give a shout out to Mr. Still, because it was very difficult for him and during that time period, and it really did change his life.
Yes, the moral conviction is strong here, Bob. Thank you for, sharing that. With that, I'm going to end our third director's dialogue here. We're going to end it here. I want to just ask the listener to take a look at the trailer again. We have, tons more information over at bobshands.com. We encourage you to come browse, take a look, share this information with those who you feel would appreciate it. Also, we also invite you to be a part of our mailing list so that you can get all of the updates as they come directly to your inbox. So we want to encourage you to do that. Also, we will have another director's dialogue. We'll send out some announcements about that coming soon here. So stay tuned, be a part of that email list so that you don't miss that update. Also, like and subscribe to this video so that you can continue to get updates here as well, wherever you may be watching. And then finally, I want to encourage you to help us keep this topic to the forefront. It's so important that discussions like these stay alive. So we want to, keep it in front of you, keep this information in front of you, because we're really fighting the truth here. We really want to fight for the truth here. That's what we're here to do with this documentary, as are so many other documentaries. We want to shed light on the truth. And with that, in order for us to do that, we do need contributions and support from viewers like you. So with that, we've included a link to the fundraiser in the description notes here. We encourage you to visit the website, visit us at Gifts and Go, search for Oasis in Atlanta, and we encourage you to leave a donation of your prayers. Please pray for this documentary. That goes a long way. That's actually truly the most important thing we can do, is to pray that this information gets to as many people as possible. But then also your monetary contributions are very important to us. So please help us to bring this to the masses, to everyone. Share this away if you can. If there's, if you're not able to give in that way, sharing this documentary with those in your circle is very important as well, and also goes a long way. So we very much appreciate all of your contributions to this. So we'll put out some more news about the next director's dialogue here shortly. So stay tuned, stay subscribed to us, subscribe to our email newsletter, and we'll be back for more. Other than that, thank you for watching this third director's dialogues, and we will see you again soon.